Hi guys, I'm Randy with BRStv, and today we're talking about the Tunze Osmolator 3155 Auto Top Off system. Stay tuned as we explore everything from how this ATO works, what accessories you can use, and how to get one installed and running on your system. Depending on the size of your tank, you could be losing up to a gallon or more of water every day due to evaporation, which means you'll probably be lugging around fresh water to keep it topped off by hand. As many reefers will tell you, a stable reef tank is a successful reef tank, so when it comes to mitigating salinity swings from the evaporated water, nothing makes it easier than an auto top-off system. The Tunze Osmolator 3155 is probably one of the most trusted ATOs on the market, as it's been tried and tested for over 10 years. I've personally never known anyone who's had it fail them in the on position, and that may largely be attributed to the Osmolator's use of 3 different types of redundancy: the optical sensor, mechanical float switch, and the 10-minute maximum runtime. Not only that, but this ATO is one of the only ones out there with built-in adjustability to the DC pump's flow rate, which allows you the option to fine-tune it to meet your specific needs. On top of it all, Tunze USA has top-notch service and support, who's always ready to solve any issue immediately. So let's dive in deeper to the Osmolator 3155 ATO. The Tunze 3155 is great for any tank size and typically meets most reefers' needs directly out of the box. Although there is the less feature-rich Tunze Osmolator Nano for tanks up to 50 gallons, the 3155 ATO is still very capable of meeting the needs of those same nano tanks because it can be adjusted. Outside of that, for those of you with much larger tanks, the included pump may be a bit underpowered, but with the help of the switch socket accessory, you can replace the pump with a more robust and higher flow one. Speaking of accessories, let's check out what's available for this ATO. There are a few accessories available for the Tunze Osmolator that really turns it into a versatile ATO capable of working for nearly every tank out there. If you're one of those with a large tank that evaporates more water than the included DC pump can keep up with, or if your specific setup requires some specialized plumbing that may be outside of the Osmolator pump specs, the switch socket outlet is available for you to control the on and off function of a separate pump that better fits your needs. If you don't want to use a pump for your ATO, you can replace it with a water valve solenoid, which will open and close to allow water to pass through and top off your tank. This solenoid valve will allow you to hook your ATO directly to a nearly limitless supply of water like a large storage tank or RODI unit, so choosing this option should come with some serious thought as to safety and redundancy to keep your tank from overfilling. I'll walk you through some scenarios on how to best use this valve a bit later. One last thing to mention about accessories: although it's a replacement part, a new pump for your 3155 comes in at less than 25 bucks and may be worthwhile to pick up just to have an extra on standby. Let's take a look at what comes in the box of the 3155 Osmolator. One of the first things you'll see is the controller box itself, which has 4 LED indicators to tell you when the water level is too high or too low, as well as when the pump is actively running or when the water is at the proper level. When the water level is too high, you'll hear an audible alarm and see a red indicator LED light up. If the 10-minute runtime has expired, you'll see the too low LED indicator come on, but there won't be an alarm. The alarm is adjustable between the two, and if you wanted to change those settings, you can open the control box and move the jumper from one set of prongs to the other. Removing it completely will turn off the alarms altogether. Moving on with the control box, you'll see the 12-volt power input, the pump power wires, and 2 sensor cables for the optical sensor and the float switch. The sensor and switch cables are each about 77 inches long, and with the pump connected to the power wire, it measures right around 90 inches. The control box also comes with 2 Velcro strips for quick and easy mounting. Next, let's talk about the pump, which is a low wattage DC powered pump, which means that it can be adjusted to various flow rates and head pressures. In nearly every application, though, the factory setting will be just fine and adjustments aren't typically necessary. However, if you did want to change them, you could adjust the dial inside the control box. When set to nano, you should expect a max head height of about 3 feet. In the middle will yield you about 9 feet of head, And when set to max, you should expect about 12 feet of head pressure. Outside of the control box and pump, there's also 2 sets of magnets to mount the sensors, as well as a guard shield for a mechanical float switch, which we'll talk about assembling a bit later. Finally, the Tunze Osmolator will come with about 9 feet 11 inches of tubing and a bracket to secure the tubing to tanks up to nearly an inch thick. There is a little bit of assembly required before installing the Tunze ATO on your system, so let's get that done first. In order for the optical sensor to operate properly and not run the risk of interference from outside light sources, you'll want to mount it with the tip pointing downward. To do that, simply run the cable through the adjustable bracket on the magnetic mount, push the sensor in place, and give it a small turn to lock it in. With that done, we'll mount the float switch with the threaded end on the bottom. Thread the nut onto the switch to securely hold it in place, then route the cable around the post and through the retaining clip. And you're done! If you wanted to separate the 2 sensors to better fit your specific needs, the additional set of magnets can be used to hold the float switch on its own. This configuration does require the protective guard, but it's super simple to snap in place. I also like to assemble the tubing bracket before getting the osmolator completely installed on the tank. This is easily done by removing the screw while being careful not to lose the nut underneath, and screwing it back into place with the tube holder in between. You'll also want to install a rubber spacer to protect your glass or acrylic from any potential scratches. One more thing to mention here, the magnets are very strong and should be handled cautiously. It's best practice to try to keep them separated until you mount them to your sump or tank, or store them with a piece of foam or cardboard in between. Installing the Tunze Osmolator is pretty easy and can be mounted in the sump, inside the rear chambers of an all-in-one tank, or in the display tank itself. First, I'll mount the control box using the included Velcro strips in a dry location with easy access. Just be sure that if the Velcro were to ever come off, you mount it in a place where it doesn't run the risk of falling into the water. With the controller mounted, I can now mount the sensors, which is as easy as placing them in the water and securing them from the other side with a magnet. Typically, you'll want to mount the float and sensor in the return pump chamber because it usually has fairly calm flow. And remember that the water level will be determined by the tip of the optical sensor, so be sure to mount it where it's just touching the water surface. The optical sensor is attached to an adjustable bracket, so you can choose the amount of delay time before the high water float switch is triggered. If you're mounting the sensors directly in the display tank, you'll want this gap to be as small as possible to allow a minimal amount of height that the water has to rise before shutting off. Now all you have to do is mount the tubing and connect it to the pump inside your ATO reservoir. Choosing a mounting location for the discharge end can be a bit tricky because you have to be mindful of creating a siphon, which can happen when the water level in the ATO is above the water level in the sump. When the pump electronically shuts off, the water will continue to flow unless you mount the discharge tube in a higher location. To ensure this doesn't happen, many reefers choose to mount their tubing to the top of the display itself. With everything installed and ready to go, let's talk about the various setup and use options that you can choose for your ATO. As I mentioned earlier, you can use the additional accessories to customize how this ATO works for you. For large tanks or for longer plumbing runs, sometimes the included DC pump just isn't powerful enough to do the job. That's where you can install the switch socket outlet in place of the pump to utilize a more robust pump that better fits your needs. In order to do this, simply pull the wires out of their existing connections and insert them into the powered connections on the control box. Now you'll need to open the controller and turn the flow adjustment dial to max to ensure that the outlet gets as much signal from the controller as possible. Just remember that these adjustment settings will not control the flow rate of the pump you choose to plug into the socket. Another setup option is to use a solenoid to control water coming directly from a reservoir or from your RODI unit. Although this option is very attractive, there are some redundancy measures that you should consider before hooking up your ATO to a nearly limitless water supply. As you can see, we added a float valve to the highest point in the sump of the BRS 160. That way, should the solenoid fail, we have one more layer of protection before the water climbs over the walls of the sump. Along with that, it may be a good idea to add a ball valve and leak block sensor like this to the source water line. The ball valve will allow you to manually shut off the water flow for maintenance or in the event of a leak, while the leak block sensor will serve as a backup solenoid that will close when it detects water where it's not supposed to be. All in all, there's always that chance that something may fail eventually, but with redundancy features like this, we can manage it to a point where we're a bit more comfortable trusting that we're protected. Finally, let's cover some tips and tricks to really help you master the Tunze Osmolator 3155. One of the first tips is to remember to shut the ATO off when doing a water change or removing water from the tank for any reason. I know this may seem like a no-brainer, but I don't know how many times I've forgotten to do this, and I didn't realize it until my ATO reservoir ran dry. Along with that, if your ATO reservoir does run dry, you'll most likely have to reprime the pump after topping it off to get the water flowing again. The quickest way to do this is to shake the pump up and down while it's running until it starts to flow. Lastly, if you decide to use the 3155 with kalkwasser in your ATO reservoir, you'll want to take measures to protect the pump. Many times there's residual caulk slurry that settles at the bottom of the reservoir, especially if you're mixing it in the container itself. In order to save the pump from potential damage by sucking up the slurry, you can build a little DIY stand out of egg crate like this to keep it elevated off the bottom. There are some easy maintenance steps to keep the Tunze Osmolator working consistently for you. Cleanliness is key when it comes to keeping any floats, sensors, or pumps running in tip-top shape, so it's best practice to add cleaning these components to your routine maintenance schedule. You can easily clean the optical sensor, float switch, and pump with 5% citric acid solution or 50-50 vinegar to water mix, which will help to decrease precipitate, algae, and salt creep buildup. Thanks for watching, and if you have any more questions that we didn't answer here, feel free to give us a call, send us an email, or hop on a chat. See you next time on BRS TV.